Welcome to the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels. Welcome, Brent.
Hey, good to be here with you, Joris.
Yeah, it's good to be back to do this again. And just for everybody who's listening, essentially what we're both trying to do is for prosthetics and orthotics. It's a really exciting time. From a traditional industry that uses machine tools and a lot of handiwork, there's a potential digitization happening with software, with 3D printing, with 3D scanning. When we say potential digitization, we don't really yet know what's going to happen. So Brent Wright is a certified orthotist and prosthetist, and he works on this digitization. He works with 3D printing and prosthetics and orthotics and 3D scanning and stuff like this. I myself am a 3D printing consultant, and I've been doing that for a long time. And we're both looking at this landscape, and we're like, well, what is going to happen and what isn't going to happen? So because we're so excited by this and we're excited about the implications, but we are totally unaware of what's going to happen, that's why we decided to do this. And that's why we're doing this podcast. And what we're trying to do today is kind of frame this and say, what does a prosthetist and orthotist do, actually? So this is kind of like a day in the life of a prosthetist and orthotist. And that's kind of, we're trying to kind of get our bearings a little bit to see how this whole process works. And Brent will explain this to us, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's a fun thing to explain, and it's a niche little industry, and I hope nobody that's listening to us ever needs us, but if you do, I hope that this will kind of give you some framework around what our little field does.
Okay, cool. First, a little bit of definitions. We hear prosthetist and orthotist. What does it mean? What is the difference between those two disciplines?
Yeah. So great question. And the way that I like to frame it, and now I'm getting a little bit older, but I would say most people still have seen Forrest Gump. And so have you seen Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have two main characters. You have Forrest Gump, who wears braces on his leg. And then you have Lieutenant Dan, who lost his limb. So Lieutenant Dan would be wearing a prosthesis or a prosthetic device, and he would be treated by a prosthetist. So a prosthetist is somebody that replaces a missing extremity for a patient, whereas an orthotist creates braces much like Forrest Gump wore, except we're wanting to do better braces than Forrest Gump braces. But the idea is we actually fit or correct a deformity or a weakness in an extremity as well. So we actually correct for it. And it's almost like an exoskeleton that goes over a part of somebody's body. So, and that can be spine, leg, arm, even heads for kids that have what's called plagiocephaly and brachiocephaly, which is just a misshapen head or a flat spot on the head. So, so somebody that needs the help of an orthotist needs some sort of bracing device, orthotic device, or orthosis. So that's the distinction between the two. One is replacing something that's not there, and one is working with something that is there.
Okay, and then there's also something, and I always get these confused. I'm asking, it's also a podiatrist, right?
So a podiatrist is actually just a different part of medicine. So they have their own section. So a podiatrist is typically a DPM, which stands for Doctor of Podiatric Medicine, and they have their own schooling and everything, but they typically deal with foot and ankle disorders. So there is some overlap. So like a podiatrist may send an orthotist a prescription to do a brace for one of his or her patients if they have some sort of deficiency or they need some sort of correction. Now, a lot of times podiatrists will typically deliver those items inside their office and don't refer them out. But with that being said, there are plenty of great podiatrist and orthotist relationships that are there. The other interesting thing about podiatrists, though, is they do treat a lot of people with diabetes. So taking care of their feet and such. And so the number one reason for amputation is diabetes here in the United States. And really it's creeping up for the whole world. So almost 80% of all amputations are due to diabetes. And so
Wow.
those podiatrists may be treating a patient and then they're like, you know what, we can't do anything further. We're going to have to amputate. And then they may refer on to a prosthetist if you have a relationship with them. So that's the way podiatry kind of fits into
Mm-hmm.
the market.
Okay. And so you've done both, right? So you're both an orthotist and a prosthetist, but these are completely different like educational streams, or how does it work?
So, correct. They're kind of historically speaking, you could be certified as an orthotist and you could be certified as a prosthetist, or you can be certified together. Now, as of, I believe it's like the 2014, 2015 era, to become a prosthetist and orthotist, it's actually a combined education. So they no longer split it up. And so the only way to become a prosthetist and orthotist is to have an undergraduate degree and then go for your master's in prosthetics and orthotics. And then there still are 6 exams that you have to pass if you want to do both. So 3 for each discipline. There's a practical exam, which is actually in person, where you see patients and you've got somebody kind of looking over your shoulder to make sure you know what you're doing and asking the right questions. There is kind of like a multiple choice, and I'm blanking on the term now, but it's multiple choice and such, just to know that you've got your vocabulary down and thought process down. And then there's another one that sets up these kind of clinical examples, and then it tests what type of things you would do for a patient if they presented in a certain way. And so you sit for 3 of those after you do a residency with a company like the company that I work for, East Point Prosthetics and Orthotics. So, and you can do that with any company that's a certified residency site. So it is a process to become an orthotist and a prosthetist, and and there's very few schools. I still think there may be a dozen schools now in the United States, and we're probably only graduating 150, maybe
Wow.
200 people a
It's
year.
not a
So
lot, huh?
it's not a lot, and that's a problem because
Okay.
the need is becoming greater and greater.
And does that mean, and why is it? Is it just not known? Is it just not popular? Because to me, it actually always sounded like it sounds useful. It sounds super useful. At the end of the day, you can make somebody walk better, or have them be much more functional in life. And it's a bunch of tinkering. There's some invention. It sounds like, actually, it sounds like a lot of fun, dude.
Yeah, well, and that's what's neat now is that we see a lot of people that are interested in the field from physical therapy as well as biomedical engineering. So most of the classes, I would say over half of the classes now are full of people that actually have an undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering, which, if for the future of our field is fantastic, because not only do we have somebody that has some engineering background as it relates to the body, but now, some people interested in digitization and can actually do some of that just because it's a crossover from what they had in their undergraduate. So it's a really neat time, and the real reason why I think that there's not more programs is it is very expensive program to put on. Not only do you have to pay for patient models and figure all that out, I can't imagine how much the insurance is to have students working on patients, and then there's the material costs that go along with it. Even basic and the machines and all that stuff, it really can run the price of a program up. And then you don't have a bunch of teachers or professors that really want to undertake it, because it's such an interesting field, like it is a combination of, like what you were saying, hands-on tinkering and that sort of thing, mixed with anatomy, physiology, gait analysis, that sort of thing. And so it really takes a special kind of program and a relationship with a university to make these go off almost as a multidisciplinary conglomerate program. Um, and you have some programs that are actually placed in, like Northwestern, it's considered part of their medical school. And I believe there's a couple others that are there. So you actually may be taking some anatomy or cadaver with some, first year uh, students for that want to be doctors or something like that. So it's an interesting thing, but I do think that with the digitization and such, we might be able to drive those costs down and make those programs very intimate. And at that point, it may be very interesting to have uh, other programs or other schools pick it up.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Okay, so once so I have to do my residency at like a center, right? And what do
Mm-hmm.
these people do? Are they then going to set off by themselves and start their own practice or join a practice? What's the career path for most of these people?
Yeah, so so you got your school, you're in your residency. So I'll just say it from the East Point side of things. You typically are in a residency for 18 months to 24 months, depending on how you want to do it. At the end of that residency, you're essentially a free agent. The company, which in our case, East Point Prosthetics and Orthotics, has provided you an education and such, and you can choose to, you know, move on, or you can also stay with the company that you have, providing that you come to, all the arrangements and such. But the residency, just because you do a residency with your facility, doesn't mean that you're going to stay on in that facility or that there will be a position available for you after that. So it is an interesting dynamic with the residency. But one of the things that we're excited about with East Point is that we get to share really a combination of patient care, because we are so vast and comprehensive in what we provide. So anything from foot orthoses all the way up to prostheses that have microprocessors and microelectrics and all that in it. And so you really have the gamut. And then on top of that, the 3D printing side of things. So when people that are coming out of school are looking for residencies, my main goal for them is to let them see a whole variety of patients so they have a great education, so then they can truly do whatever they want. So if they want to specialize in one way or the other way, they can, or they can be more of a generalist. But we want our residents coming out of this feeling like, hey, we can conquer the world, and we have enough experience under our belt to do that. So for those that are looking for residencies, that's what I would say is look for a residency that's going to give you the whole gamut of experience, because so many times we've had some patients in different offices in East Point have different specialties or are heavier in one area. So for instance, our Raleigh office, it sees a lot of children and kids. And I can't tell you the amount of times that we've had residents come through and say, I thought that all I wanted to do was make prostheses, but I really enjoyed my time with the kids. And so now I'm kind of stepping back and thinking, okay, how do I take this I love for making prostheses and love for kids? And is there a career path for me that will do both? But without both of those experiences, they wouldn't have necessarily had that opportunity to see that that was something they enjoyed.
Okay, okay. And are most people like super specialized, or most people really generalists, or how does it work out?
I would say that you start off as a generalist, probably very similar to medicine, and there are things that you become good at. And if you have a big enough practice, then you can have multiple people that are good at different things, and that way your patients can get really taken care of. Now, there are some smaller, like 1 or 2 person clinical offices, and they have to be generalists for everything, um, which is fine too, and it's a great way to make a living and keep your skills sharp as well.
Okay, okay. And 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 so and there's no like prosthetics R Us or something. Are there big chains of this, or is it like small local practices, or kind of in between, like regional ones, or how does it work really?
Yeah, so you have big regional companies. So there's a big company called Hanger Prosthetics and Orthotics. They are publicly traded, and they're probably the biggest one here in the United States. And so they have, all the things that come along with a uh, a company that is publicly traded, that has investors and that sort of thing, numbers to hit, that sort of thing. But I tell you what, I did my residency with a Hanger Prosthetics and Orthotics, and I wouldn't give that up for the world, because I learned not only how to see a high volume of patients, I got to see a variety of patients. But then they also, because they're publicly traded, and you have to do everything to a T, documentation, your coding, all that. It was a great opportunity for me to learn all that during my residency, and then make a decision whether I was going to stay with Hanger, or kind of venture on. And eventually I ventured on, but I would not give that up. And I would also tell that to people that are looking for residencies, is you want to make sure that you do get a variety. Residency isn't supposed to be a walk in the park. Um, as much as I would love to say that there should be a work-life balance, if there's a work-life balance during residency, um, uh, more than likely you're not getting enough stuff in your short amount of time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So it's like,
yeah.
um, there are some small companies that may only see a few patients a day. I would much rather in my residency see as many patients as I can a day, and learn as much as I can, and compress that education, to better be a better version of myself once I become a certified clinician.
Mhm. Okay, but most players in this are kind of relatively small companies, right? Or most of the volume, right?
Yeah, so most of it is, you have kind of smaller regional players. So you're going to have, we call them mom and pops,
Mhm.
which are 1 or 2 person offices. They may have a technician and a front office person, kind of a max of 3 or 4 people.
Mhm.
And then you do have some regional players where it may push like 50 employees, 60 employees.
Mhm.
But I don't believe there's anybody bigger than that
Okay,
right
okay.
now. And then one of the things, though, that we're seeing is some of the vendors
Mhm.
that used to just sell like feet and knees and things like that to the market are also trying to get in part of the game, essentially. So your Autovox and Osers um, are actually buying up some of these small practices, and they're becoming kind of a regional force
Mhm.
to be reckoned with. So it's really an interesting time
Mhm.
to be a part of this field, and a lot of people don't know all the ins and outs that are
Mhm.
happening, because it is such a niche field. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the number of um, patients we see and claims billed to insurances, I mean, we are barely a blip on the radar, if a blip on the radar. So
Mhm.
a lot of people don't know about us.
Okay, okay. So okay, imagine so yeah, we're doing a day in the life of an orthotist and prosthetist. So imagine I lose my limb. What happens? How do I end up in your office? What's the path?
Yeah. So there's really 2 paths that I see, and one is not necessarily better than the other, but one that I really like is, if somebody has to have an amputation and they know they have to have an amputation, it's good to meet the prosthetist or whoever's going to be making your leg beforehand, because there's a lot of things that they can do for you to get you ready for the amputation. So, for instance, I had this lady that knew she was going to have an amputation because she had a ankle fracture actually that wasn't going to heal, and so her amputation was scheduled for like 3 weeks out or something like that. So she actually called a couple different places and then landed on seeing me to be her prosthetist. And so we were able to talk about what's it going to look like, what's your recovery time look like, how many times are you going to see me, what does a prosthesis look like, that sort of thing. That is kind of your ideal situation. The next situation is kind of the less than ideal situation, because say if something traumatic happens, or you go into the hospital and you have a diabetes or a gangrene of your foot or something to that effect, you have to make decisions very, very quickly. And in a lot of ways, that's not in your best interests. So what happens is the you're in the hospital, and then then everything just starts cascading, and then the next thing you know, you're in your bed and you're missing your leg or your arm or what have you, and that's a pretty traumatic time. And so and then you have pain medications and all that stuff, and then you have people showing up. Hey, my name is so and so. I'm from this prosthetic company. We're here to help you transition. And then you've got therapists coming in, and it's a little bit of a mess, to be honest with you, the way that it typically happens. But for patients, this is an important part, is they ultimately have the decision on who they're going to see as a prosthetist. So they have the ability to actually, talk to different prosthetists and say, hey, what would you do for me? Or what do you think is going to be the best for me? A lot of times, and just kind of to peel back the curtain a little bit, is companies have contracts with the hospital for these traumatic type of things, or they may have some relationships with doctors that do amputations and such. And so the doctors will invite those clinicians in to see the patient and discuss, what some next steps are and that sort of thing. And the patient still has the power to make a decision at that time. Now, they might not have it because the doctor is in control of their care at that time. And so, there are some things. So if you have an amputation, one of the things that happens very quickly is a lot of times you have some swelling. And so they will put it like a stocking on your leg, which is called a compression sock. And that just helps keep the swelling down to make sure the incision and the staples, don't open up, or sutures. And it also helps just start shaping the leg. And so those are things that are very typical things that you would get in the hospital. The other thing that is super important, yet underutilized, is something called a protector. So a protector is almost like a helmet for your leg, and you've got this wound essentially that's sutured together. And a lot of people can still feel their foot or arm or what have you, and they can feel like,
yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So they can feel that. And so in the middle of the night, if they have to go to the bathroom, I can't tell you how many times a patient stand up and they've had a protector on, and they go to take a step and they fall right on the incision, and then they have to go back in for surgery. It's just a big mess. So the protector helmet is a big, big deal, because if you don't have that, even like people that are like roll over in bed or whatever, or you hit the side rails, it's a painful thing. So those are some things that to look at. The process really depends on. So you're going to be out of the hospital very, very quickly. The biggest thing is getting physical therapy. Start learning how to do transfers, hop with a walker, and just remember to take care of your other leg, because that you no longer have the other leg to stand on. And so some of the things that people make mistakes on is they like, oh, I just want to get over to that chair and I'm going to do a couple hops.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you do a couple hops without support and you do a twist, and then you end up with a twisted ankle or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you really have a situation. But you're looking about 4 to 6 weeks for that incision to heal up and to be able to have a prosthesis put on. And so it actually happens pretty quickly, believe it or not. And a lot of times having that pressure, having those gel type liners, silicone liners, actually help with the healing. And they also can help with the phantom pain, because now you have something putting some pressure and giving those nerve endings and such a feeling that they haven't had since the amputation.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then at one point, so I'm free to choose even at that stage. Then do I also get referred by the physical therapy people maybe, or am I'm doing this kind of in parallel, or do the physical therapy first and then?
Yeah. So you ultimately have your decision however you want to do. Now, there are, like, if you really like your physical therapist, you may say to your physical therapist, "Hey, I need a prosthetist. Who would you suggest, or who would you trust to do your prosthesis?"
Mm-hmm.
And they may have like a handful of people. I know for like East Point Prosthetics and Orthotics, we encourage our clinicians to go to those physical therapy appointments with the physical therapist to make sure that everything is going well for the patient. So almost like a 2-for-1 deal, as far as the patient will have our ear as well as the ear of the therapist, and then we kind of create a plan together. And the same happens with the physician. The thing that's interesting about our field, though, is we're kind of like a pharmacy in the sense that we have to work off a prescription, and prescriptions can only come from doctors, so MDs, doctor of osteopathy, nurse practitioners, and family nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. So they have to, just like if you said, "Hey, I have a sinus infection, can you get me a Z-Pack?" In the same way, they're going to write a prescription for a prosthesis. And so,
yeah, one more thing. Like, what's an osteopath?
yeah.
What's that?
So, so DO, Doctor of Osteopathy, has all the same privileges as an MD, a medical doctor, but they tend to lean to more conservative or natural approaches. But but the reality is they're the same. But they're
sounds a bit vague.
Their mantras are different. So like, whereas, and I'm generalizing here, but like an MD may say, "Hey, I'm going to put you on high blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, and all this medication," where a DO may say, "Look, man, you're 50 pounds overweight. You need to drop the weight, and then we may look at some medication for you. But the real reason for your situation is because you're 50 pounds overweight."
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So anyway, so you need a prescription.
Yep.
And that prescription, is it for a plan, or is it for the prosthetic itself, or what does that entail exactly?
Right. So it's really both. So it's for the prosthesis itself, but then this is where things get interesting, is because most doctors don't know the ins and outs of every single item that goes into a prosthesis.
Mm-hmm.
So we essentially create, for lack of a better term, a bill of materials, right? Hey, we're going to put this type of socket on them, this type of knee, this type of foot, and these components on a patient, and then the doctor will say, "You know what? I agree with that as a prescription." And then we move forward making the device. So it is a little bit of a dance between us and the doctor to make sure that we're getting the right thing for the patient, the doctor's on board, and then ultimately we have to get paid for these devices through the insurance company, that the insurance company agrees that the doctor and the prosthetist and the paperwork all match up so that we can continue providing these devices for patients in the future.
This sounds really complicated already.
It's probably too complicated for sure, and we're for the U.S. medical system, it's difficult because, for instance, I have a patient that he's 27 years old, 28 years old, um, a business guy, but he is a health nut. But his insurance company won't pay for him to get a prosthesis so he can go exercise. They just say, "Hey, you've got a prosthesis for your daily living. It's not medically necessary for you to have another prosthesis," and that's tough. Like, and I don't believe that's right. But those are things that we have to deal with. Now, lucky for us and for him, he's an advocate for himself, and we're working through a lot of that, and we have worked through a lot of that. But it's those are things that we have to work with, and there's some other things like in our prescription, you also have to say how active the patient is, and then that documentation has to match what the documentation of the doctor says how active he is, and that gets to tell you what device you can get or what caliber of pieces and parts.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it is kind of, I guess. You don't do it with other things, but yeah. Okay. All right. All right. So imagine. So how do I end up in your office? I choose you essentially. So I walk in, and presumably you will have had some contact with my other physician or
Yep.
the surgeon or whomever, right?
Yep.
And then you get my scans, or do you get any medical information up front, or?
Yeah, so we'll do a basic kind of medical evaluation for you. Just, height, weight, your strength, your goals, not only, where you are now, but then where you want to be. So we like to, do, hey, you need to be able to do this just to be activities of daily living is what we say, to do your daily things. But, if somebody wants to garden again or go hiking, those are some considerations that we have to include in there. So that initial appointment really is probably an hour to hour and a half, and we're just kind of getting to know each other and creating a plan together. Now, one of the interesting things about the way that we practice is that we're mobile. So we will actually go to patients' homes and do our evaluations and deliveries on site for a prosthesis. And there's a lot of value to that because you get to see how the patient lives. Do they have a ramp or do they only have stairs? Do they have 3 stairs or is it a flat living? Do they live on the second floor or first floor? So there's a lot of other things that you can take in when you go to this patient's home that is, very important for the prescription of the device and the best thing for them. So that's essentially that initial visit.
Okay.
And
Do you
then
look at my leg at all? Do we, or is it just more about lifestyle and the expectations and stuff?
Yeah, so we'll take a look at your leg, and then what we would do is take a look and see how everything has healed up, the kind of the scar at the end, if you have any staples, sutures left. We also look for what's called neuromas or hot spots. So we may ask you, are there any spots, if you touch it, that give you kind of a zinging sensation or kind of are painful? And then that also goes into, okay, how are we going to make sure that we don't push in those areas for the prosthesis? We also take a look at overall shape. So if you can imagine, like your calf right now has kind of a bowling ball shape to, or bowling pin shape to it, upside down. But once you do the amputation, it it a lot of times goes through, if it's a below the knee amputation, goes through the middle of that calf section. So actually, your leg will look more like a pear. And so, but we know that shape's going to change, which is why you would wear that elastic stocking. But it's harder to shape a pear-shaped limb because you've got to get that pear to the bottom of the socket, that wide part. So so those are things that we take into consideration too, is, okay, can we compress that tissue to create more of a cylindrical shape so you can get into the socket, or are we going to have to make a socket to conform to kind of this pear shape that you have? So there's a lot that goes into just the evaluation of the limb, but absolutely on that first visit, we would evaluate your limb and make a plan for that as well.
And then what happens in the second visit? Or what do you do before the second visit? Is there anything you have to do to make something already, or?
Yeah, so the first visit, we may, for the first visit, if it's a fresh amputee, we may not do any casting or anything. We may take a scan just so we can see the progress from appointment to appointment. But and then the second visit would probably be 2 to 3 weeks out. We take another scan, take a look, see how you're doing. And at that point, we may make a decision to move forward with either a test socket or what's called a preparatory prosthesis, which is kind of getting you ready for the final prosthesis. So it's a kind of an inexpensive prosthesis that you can start putting weight through it. So that would happen kind of at the second appointment, would be to measure for that. And then on that third appointment, we'd try to get you up if we measured for that, and maybe even take a couple steps.
Okay, but and so you measure. You mentioned 3D scanning, but usually you would just like literally physically measure, or what do we? How would you do this?
So one of the habits that we're trying to get into is that we want to scan the patient's limb pretty much at every visit. So that way we have a record of what the patient's limb has done over a period of time. So that first visit is scan, and then we can overlay that scan onto the second visit and say, hey, look, your shape has changed this much. It's more cylindrical, what have you. Keep that up, or we're ready to move forward with a prosthesis for you of some sort, whether it's a preparatory or a test socket.
And the preparatory or testing, like what's the difference between a preparatory and testing? Because they sound super similar.
Yeah, they are similar. And so a preparatory prosthesis is essentially the most basic prosthesis that you can get. It's typically with a liner or a gel sock, essentially, that goes over your leg, and then you've got a socket that's some form of thermoplastic, typically, and then a very basic foot. And it is literally like basic transportation, but it's to get you up and going. The neat thing about starting off with a preparatory socket is, and this is where you really have to play with the insurance game, because some insurances may say no to a preparatory prosthesis, but yes to a like the test socket and a definitive prosthesis. But I like to start with a preparatory prosthesis, because then that can become your secondary prosthesis and like a shower leg.
Ah, okay, yeah. You don't have to take an expensive one. Yeah, that's good, dude.
Yeah, so you don't want to take your expensive one that has the computer in it into the shower.
Okay,
And
that's good.
so that's why a socket is or a preparatory socket is so important. Now, one of the things that I love about 3D printing, though, is if you make a socket, you can make another socket. So with traditional fabrication, you would have to save that mold to make another mold, to make another socket. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to have this like shower leg prosthesis type of thing. But I tell you what, with 3D printing and being able just to print another socket, it makes having a secondary prosthesis kind of low level for showering, or just like a beach leg or something like that.
Beach league. Okay.
to get in and out of the water, makes it very,
Yeah.
very accessible.
Okay. That sounds really, yeah. I don't want to worry about that thing as well. And then when would I go to the final fitting? When am I going to actually? Because the thing is, am I supposed to practice on this thing? Is there a lot for me to learn, like to balance and to get around and stuff? Or
Yeah, some people take right to it, but we do encourage physical therapy to make sure that you get your walking right. So the more that you practice, and actually some of the best practice is if you walk in a hallway towards a full length mirror, you become your own best physical therapist because you can see whether you're limping, your hips are dropping, your shoulders, and you try to make the motions to make it look symmetrical. And so the people that are most successful take that physical therapy very seriously right when they first get the prosthesis.
yeah,
So,
yeah. But
so
yeah.
go ahead.
No. I was just saying that the long term, the long mistakes that you make long term in this game, I think are really debilitating. I mean, if you learn to walk incorrectly, if the prosthetic doesn't treat your foot properly or to let you walk properly, I think the long term effects would be really, really horrible, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So having another set of eyes, physical therapists and such that are on kind of training you, because there's going to be some overall weakness from you not having that, but the idea is we want to have you as symmetrical as possible, and that will ultimately give you the best outcome long term. Because if you stay symmetrical, you won't have any back problems, hip problems, and things like that. So that's why that part is so important. But then to hop into that final socket, one of the things that we look for is to make sure that you have stabilized in your size, and that's where those scanning comes in very is very important, because what we can say is, hey, you're from the last appointment to this appointment, you have not changed, which means that you've stabilized a little bit, and then we'll put you into a definitive socket. Now we know that that first socket, they're going to get more and more active, and so it may be 6 months to a year down the line where they may need just the socket or the cup replaced. The foot and everything stays the same, but more than likely the patient will shrink a little bit more because that calf muscle is no longer connected to a foot. So that muscle is not working as hard as what it should. And so that is where um, we just know that people are going to shrink, and we may need to get them another device.
Okay. And then so imagine, so it could be like literally we're talking like 8 months later maybe with everything, right? I mean, before I get a final one or
If you go through the preparatory state, now if I have a super active patient, I mean, you're probably talking a max of a couple months after amputation to your final
Mhm.
socket.
Okay.
But if we're going to go through this whole preparatory
Hmm.
phase and that sort of thing, yeah, you're probably in that ballpark, the 6 to 8 month
Okay.
range.
And the final fitting, how does that work then?
The final fitting really is making sure that the patient is comfortable, that all the trim lines and how it interacts with the patient's body, that they can sit comfortably, stand, walk at different speeds, maybe even do like some sidestep stuff, and make sure that there's no undue pressures anywhere on that patient's limb that would keep them from doing anything that they want to do. One of the things that we want patients to do is almost forget that they have the prosthesis there. And that's how I know I've done my job well is, listen, I just put my prosthesis on and I go throughout the day, and I'm off to the races, and then at night I take it off. That's kind of our dream for our patients, is that they can have that happen for them.
Okay. And the actual thing, I mean, you would have them the scan data, but you would need to then. And what do you make parts beforehand? How do you make it actually fit and everything?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So with the scan data, you typically will have to do some sort of rectification or modification to the scan data. And with the scan data, you can reduce and push in specific areas, and then 3D print via your favorite 3D printing method. My current one is a powder-based fusion or multi-jet fusion. SLS does work as well, but one of the things, and we won't dive into this too far, but one of the reasons why I chose multi-jet fusion for the definitive items or definitive devices is that it is airtight and watertight. And SLS does not have that unless it's post-processed. And so that's one of the neat things about, for prostheses, and one of the neat things, added benefits of multi-jet fusion for the final socket. So, and then we just ordered the other parts. So like the tube, which we call the pylon, and the foot, they come from different vendors. And then it's almost like a tinker toy. It's multiple screws and you put it together. You get your heights right for the patient, and then you're able to test it on the patient. And then while they're in your office or you're at their home, we have fully mobile labs to cut and trim anything, really make any adjustment. So at that appointment too, is you're making sure that they're level, that the alignment's right, that their knee's not going inside or outside, like bow-legged or pigeon-toed or any of that. We want to try to get them as most symmetrical as possible at that appointment. And then we still will have follow-up appointments. So typically, if everything's going well, we'll do a 2-week appointment after that, and then we'll bump it out to about 2 months, and then we'll start seeing the patient like once a quarter. And I think that's the thing that people forget, is that humans change in size. You're plus or minus 5% of your body weight every day. And so that affects how your prosthesis fits. And so one of the things that people have to really take into consideration is, okay, so how do I keep my limb as stable as possible? Is it diet? Is it exercise? A combination of both? Those are all things that they have to really be thinking of, because we have some patients that have diabetes or such, and they love like potato chips or cookies or what have you, and it does cause swelling or retention of water, and it does make the prosthesis fit differently. And so those are things that we have to take into consideration. And I know you really like the adjustable dial type of things.
Yeah, I love that, dude. I think
And
that's just a really nifty invention. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those are all things that we have to think about when we're dealing with patients that may fluctuate in volume or size while they're wearing their prosthesis.
Is there like a Reebok pump? Remember the Reebok pump? Are you old enough for that? Is there like a
Oh,
Reebok pump
yeah.
prosthesis or not? Is that good?
So there's actually a lot of patents around that from the 60s and 70s. One of the things that they found, though, is that air wasn't a great way to control the tissue. You've got to have something that's a little bit harder. Yeah. But there was definitely, and I made traditionally when I was a technician a few of those prostheses with the little bladders and pumps.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And by the way, okay, you say that there's clinician and technician. Is there a distinction between this as well?
Oh, that's a good, yeah. So a technician is typically somebody that assembles the prosthesis. They're not necessarily certified. So, but there are certified technicians. That means that you're certified to make orthotic and prosthetic devices. Whereas a clinician, that is kind of general, because your residents can be clinicians as well. So you do have to, I don't necessarily want to watch for that word, but just know that the name clinician, or that word clinician, is very general.
Okay. All right. And normally, would I be dealing with one person? Do I have like one contact, and he or she does everything with me, or how does it work?
So it depends on the style of practice that you go to. for East Point, we really try to make it to where you have a relationship with one clinician. But if that clinician goes on vacation, goes on maternity leave, whatever it is that we want to make sure that you have another qualified professional that will kind of stand in the gap to help you through anything while they're out.
Okay. That's cool. And then these two, like, so you have these meetings like to every quarter or something to assess fit.
Mhm.
Is it also, are there consumables on this thing? Does it wear down? Do you have to replace a lot of components or?
So on the component side of things, not typically. So like the foot and the knee and that sort of thing, we won't replace that. They're good for about 3 years, 3 to 5 years, unless the patient has significantly decreased their weight or increased their weight. Then they would need to go to a different category of foot because or knee, because they are based upon weight. But there are these gel liners or socks that do need to be replaced frequently. And so we try to say you need to replace them every 6 months. So you get two every 6 months. But, that is best case scenario. I would say reality is most patients will change their liners out, hopefully once once a year.
Okay.
But I mean, you got to think about it. I mean,
yeah.
it's like wearing the same pair of socks. You have two pairs of socks and you're going back and forth. So that's the best visual that I can give is like, you really want to make sure that you keep those fresh because that's what's going to make you the most successful in your prosthesis.
No, obviously. And then, and how long does the thing itself last? Let's say, or is that really vary widely depending on what I do with it? Or?
Yeah. So useful life is kind of vague in the world of orthotics and prosthetics. The 3 million cycles, which is essentially 3 years, is where all our testing stops. And so kind of a general rule of thumb is if somebody's active, it probably need to look at replacing it about every 3 years.
Okay.
So that's just a general rule of thumb. But man, I've seen some prostheses. I had a guy come in with one of the original carbon fiber feet about 2 years ago, and that thing was built in the 80s, early 80s. So that thing was almost 40 years old.
Wow.
So you see the whole gamut. But to really be active and be successful, I would say, every 3 years. And the technology for our field is changing so fast. I would think that you would want to have not necessarily the latest and greatest, but what makes sense for you at the time. And if there has been a jump in technology, then to do that.
Okay. And how much does this cost? I mean, I know this is a crazy question because there's like a huge difference. I mean, what are we talking ballpark in the cost of these things? Like,
Yeah. So a lot of it depends. I mean, so here in the U.S., you have contracted rates for your, what is your cap of what you can bill. But I would say for a below the knee prosthesis, kind of just basic bare bones, you're looking anywhere from probably $3,500, and then you can go all the way up to probably around $125,000 with a foot with a microprocessor and hydraulics and all that stuff.
okay.
It's a lot. So it's everything in between, and then for an above the knee amputee, those knee joints is more expensive. So you're probably looking anywhere from about $6,000 all the way up to, man, I don't even know, because there are some powered knees that are out there that just the knee alone is over $100,000.
Wow. Okay. Because it's a hydraulic component as well. That could be really complex.
It's like hydraulic gyroscopes, and it helps you like walk upstairs.
Wow.
So it's almost bionic, but they're heavy and all that stuff. But generally speaking, I would say, you see all these things that, hey, the prosthesis is so expensive. I would say that those are definitely the extremes. The average prosthesis, I mean, they're still expensive, but I would say for a below the knee prosthesis, you're going to average probably somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000. and then an above the knee prosthesis. Um, uh, you may add another $5,000 for the knee, so maybe an average of like 15,000, something like that. So it's expensive. There's no doubt about it. The other interesting thing about this, though, is we don't get paid for time. So, like, when you go in for a doctor's office or an office visit or what have you, um, it's important to know that, hey, when you decide to pull a trigger on a prosthesis, it's kind of with you for a period of time, and then that person is with you for a period of time as well. So, like, if you get a prosthesis, we get paid up front for it, but then we're uh, obligated to take care of that prosthesis really for the next 3 years. And there's not a lot of money that exchanges hands unless there's some consumables that are purchased. So that's what's interesting is, like, if you come in 100 times, I don't get paid for you to come in 100 times. To do that, it's all lumped into that initial payment. So what I want to do is make sure that I'm providing a good product, and then following up with you on a consistent basis to make sure that you're okay doing the things that you need to do, everything's fitting, and avoid something that's like, say, I hadn't seen you in a year. And this is what happened a lot during COVID, because everybody was keeping in, and they weren't necessarily wearing their prosthesis or what have you. And then we're in a situation where your activity level has changed, the weight has changed, and we've got to either make a new prosthesis or make a plan of how to get you into the current prosthesis. So it's an awesome field to be in, but there's so many nuances that go into this, taking care of a patient. And I would say, for the most part, prosthetists have very big hearts, and they truly want the best for their patients, and which is why we stay in the business, is to help patients. And it's a fun, great way to make a living. But I would say that there's not people out there that are just getting massively rich off of providing prostheses.
Okay, that's good.
Which I see that in a lot of articles. It's like we're out there driving our Bentleys and popping, having the big gold chains and all that stuff. I mean, there might be a few of those people out there, but for the most part, it's just regular people.
All right, man. So I think, Brent, I think it's a great overview of what a day in the life of a orthotist prosthetist is, kind of, or at least a patient part of it. Let's say. I think next time maybe we go a little bit into other stuff that you do around the office, like what else do you have to do? Do you have to stay ahead of the literature? Do you have to do materials research? Do you fabricate in house, that kind of thing? So I think the next time is like we talk a little bit more maybe about the business of this, which you kind of alluded to. But yeah, I really love this conversation, man. Really love learning all about this.
All right. Well, this has been great to share, and it's kind of interesting to hear everything that goes on in that, but also hear kind of your perspective and prodding, questioning of, because it's great, because you don't know what question to ask, and I think you're asking some great questions for people that will be listening to this.
Cool, man. Yeah, definitely. So that was Brent Wright, everybody, and my name is Joris Peels, and we hope you enjoyed our podcast. Thank you.